What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have, once again, two areas of interest tagged by the National Hurricane Center. This first area of interest is this tropical wave right here that is gradually organizing, and the second tropical wave is this one that is starting to come off the coast of Africa. We're actually going to go ahead and, before we get to the NHC, we're going to go ahead and zoom in and show you what's going on. So this is that tropical wave that's coming off. We're going to go ahead and show you what was going on last night, because we were looking at a pretty crazy thing. Like, look at this blob of convection we had going on right here. This was around 10 o'clock last night in Central Time, and if you take a look at this is a pretty big tropical wave right here. However, not all waves act like that 100% of the time. Started fizzling out considerably, and now we have this decent-sized tropical wave that's coming off. So definitely something to monitor, but it's not as big as what people were saying on Twitter last night. So that's what we have going on right there. We're going to go ahead and show you the NHC updates right here. Here's what we have for the 2 p.m. advisory. 20% chance of formation. This one actually got a bit of an increase. We now have a 30% chance of formation in the next 7 days. We're going to go ahead and show you some model runs that we've been looking at. We were going to go ahead and start with the European, because a lot of these runs I've been looking at are pretty interesting, to say at the very least. Here's what we have for the European system. The European has a tropical wave, this one wave right here starting to move through the Atlantic right here. This second tropical wave coming off the coast of Africa right here. This wave, according to the operational European, is expected to move through the Caribbean Sea, and once it gets there, there is the possibility of better tropical conditions once it gets there. We'll have to wait and see what happens when it comes to that, because the second tropical wave is expected to organize and develop in the main development region and get down to tropical storm strength, actually, according to this, what we have, potentially 50-mile-per-hour tropical storm before it moves off in the north. No threat to land with that. So that's what we have going on with the European. We're going to go ahead and next show you the GFS, because the GFS has also been picking up on this. So this is pretty interesting, to say at the very least. The GFS has this tropical wave moving through the Caribbean, kind of cross-checking and matching the European. However, by the time it gets to Jamaica, some organization does start to develop, and by the time it approaches Cuba, it really starts to rapidly organize and rapidly intensify as time continues to go on, as it approaches the western tip of Cuba. And a similar path to that of Hurricane Ida back in 2021, it really starts to rapidly organize and rapidly intensify, gets down to 957 millibars before it approaches the Louisiana coast right here, according to the GFS. Keep in mind, by the time this thing really starts to ramp up in potential tropical development, it's about 10 days out. So even though the GFS is picking up on this, and it has been picking up on this for the last several runs, we have, it's still 10 days out, and for the GFS especially, it's fantasy land at that point. So could it happen? Absolutely, especially with what we have going on, especially with the ocean heat content we have in the Caribbean, over 175 plus across much of the Caribbean, where this tropical wave is going to be moving through. And we have more than enough warm water, 30 plus degrees Celsius across this area right here. However, considering this is the GFS, I am taking it with a grain of salt for now, but it is certainly a possibility. Next one we're going to go ahead and show you is the CMC run. Here's what we have going on. At least the tropical wave that's in Africa, right? Not in Africa, but off the coast right there. It is expected to actually move a bit further to the north. It is supposed to be strengthening. Here's a trend I am noticing with these runs. The trends that have this thing developing quicker have it pushing up further to the north with that Azores high. And this tropical waves that keep it weaker, the scenarios that keep it weaker, have it moving through the Caribbean and developing later. So this is a situation that we're going to have to pay attention to for the next few days. Depending on how quickly this organizes and how quickly this develops will depend on how strong these things get. So the CMC has this moving up, strengthening into a hurricane. However, the CMC is also picking up on another potential tropical wave that's currently over here. That's currently apparently in the western main development region. I'm not 100% sure where it's getting that from, but it does move through the Bahamas, through Cuba, through Florida, then enters the Gulf, starts really rapidly intensifying, gets down to a 999 millibar tropical storm before it approaches South Texas over here, which this is about 8 days out, so we need to take that with a grain of salt. However, I am going to continue to monitor this as time continues to go on, as we are getting into the dog days of August and September. Last one we're going to go ahead and show you is the Icon Run. The Icon Run, similar to that of the European and GFS, has this thing moving through the Caribbean Sea. At least for now, it has it moving towards it. However, the Icon at this point is 180 hours out. This is the tropical wave that's in the Atlantic now. This is the tropical wave that is going to be coming off of Africa. So, depending on how this executes, the Icon might be cutting a path, a bit, kind of splitting the difference between the European GFS and the CMC. So, we're going to have to wait and see as more model runs come out. But we're going to go ahead and next show you some things that we need to take into consideration. First thing we need to take into consideration is the wind shear. Wind shear across much of the Atlantic, pretty good for development. We're going to go ahead and show you the East Atlantic as well to kind of give you a better idea. This is where that tropical wave is in the MDR. There's this tropical wave that's over Africa. Pretty good shear all around for development. It's just going to take some time as it's going to be battling some dry air early on. Now we're going to go ahead and show you the shear forecast going through this. The shear forecast according to the European. There is some shear that is going to hamper development early on in the Caribbean Sea. However, by the time it gets to Jamaica and by the time it gets to the Western Caribbean, I think this is why the GFS is picking up on this, it's going to be weakening considerably, because by the time it starts developing, it's out to like 174 hours or so. So there's definitely weaker wind shear going towards that and going into the Gulf of Mexico. However, by the time it enters the Gulf of Mexico, yeah, there is still some shear battling out, but that's more so to do with the outflow and potential inflow than really anything to do with wind shear. There's not really that much of a trough or a ridge in the Gulf of Mexico. If we go ahead and cross-check this with the moisture component, this is where things get a bit interesting, because there is plenty of moist air across the Caribbean by the time it gets there, and once it gets there, for this thing to develop. Yeah, there's some wind shear that it has to deal with, but if there's enough moist air and there's enough warm water, it could definitely balance out and potentially, at least for the time being, still strengthen, but at a slower pace. So that's what we have going on in the Caribbean and the Gulf, and by the time this alleged tropical system enters the Gulf of Mexico, there's some moderately dry air near Florida, but across the Western Gulf, there's light dry air, there's pretty moist air as well across the western two-thirds of the Gulf right there. So next thing we're going to go ahead and show you is the European ensemble runs. European ensemble runs have been trending further and further to the south, so that's something we need to keep an eye on, and that's indicating that short-term loss, long-term gain, as I like to say this. So the European ensemble does have some scenarios developing, however, it remains south of the Lesser Antilles, although the stronger runs do have it moving north towards the Leeward Islands and Puerto Rico. The weaker ones have it moving through the Windward Islands and staying in the Caribbean. And considering how much OHC and how much warm water there is, definitely a lot of room for development. And the Europeans are kind of a bit of a split about 10 days out, so something to monitor for sure. The stronger runs have it moving potentially to South Carolina or staying out to sea, while the weaker runs have it moving through the Gulf of Mexico, and that's when the interesting show will begin according to the European ensemble. This is something we're going to continue monitoring here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel, so stay tuned for more updates. We're going to go ahead and close the video right here. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new. It helps us out, helps us make more videos like these. The goal of this channel is to get more people engaged with weather. But with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.